I noticed it because of the reminder. A soft sound, nothing alarming, just the kind of notification you hear dozens of times a day without thinking. I was in the kitchen, rinsing a glass, when my phone vibrated on the counter. I dried my hands slowly and picked it up. A calendar alert. Meeting confirmed 7:30 p.m. I frowned slightly. I didn't remember scheduling anything for that evening. That wasn't unusual by itself. Sometimes things slip through. You accept something weeks in advance and forget. But something about it felt unfamiliar. I opened the calendar. The event expanded. Meeting confirmed 7:30 p.m. location. Central office, room 204 status. Attended. I stared at the last word. Attended past tense, but the time it was only 6:12 p.m. I checked again, same result, same line, same confirmation. I leaned against the counter slightly, because that didn't make sense. An event scheduled for later, already marked as completed. I refreshed the calendar. The screen blinked, reloaded, nothing changed, still there, still marked as attended. I scrolled through the rest of the day. Everything else looked normal. A call from the morning, a grocery reminder, nothing unusual, until I moved back to the previous day. That's when I saw it. Another event. Appointment 10:00 a.m. location, West Clinic status, attended. I didn't move, because I hadn't gone to any clinic, not yesterday, not recently. I tapped it. The details opened. Precise, structured, even a note at the bottom. Follow-up recommended. I felt something settle inside me, not panic, something colder, clearer, because this wasn't a mistake. Mistakes don't organize themselves like that. I scrolled further. 2 days ago, another event. Consultation 3:15 p.m. status, attended. 3 days ago. Review session 11:00 a.m. status, attended. Each one complete. Each one confirmed. Each one not mine. I exhaled slowly. Then I checked the timestamps. All aligned, all consistent, no gaps. No overlaps, perfectly placed. I leaned forward slightly, resting my hand on the counter, because now the question wasn't whether something had been added, it was something else. When did it start? I scrolled back further. 5 days, 7, 10, and there it was, the first one. Introductory meeting 9:00 a.m. status, attended. 10 days ago, I tapped it. Same structure, same format. Same tone, but something stood out. At the bottom, a small line, barely noticeable. Initial confirmation received. I stared at it, because that didn't belong, not in a normal calendar entry. I looked at the current time again. 6:14 p.m., then back at the first notification. Meeting confirmed 7:30 p.m. status, attended. That one didn't have the same note. Which meant something had changed, not the events, the process. I straightened slowly, because now the pattern was forming. Something had started 10 days ago, and since then it had continued. Consistently, precisely, without me, I picked up the phone again, opened today's event. The one at 7:30, still marked as attended, still not happened. I scrolled down, looking for anything else. And then I saw it, a section I hadn't noticed before. Activity log, I tapped it. The screen paused, then opened. A timeline, clean, detailed, and at the top, a single line. Entry confirmed 7:31 p.m. I froze, because it was still 6:15. That time hadn't happened yet, and yet it was already recorded. I stared at it, trying to process what I was seeing. Not just the event, the confirmation, the log. Something was documenting actions before they occurred. I locked the phone, set it down, then stepped back slightly, because I needed distance. Not from the object, from the thought. This wasn't a glitch, not something visual, not something temporary. It was structured, complete, and consistent across multiple days. I turned away from the counter, walked slowly into the living room, sat down, then leaned forward again. Because sitting still didn't change anything, I picked up the phone, unlocked it. Opened the calendar again, and this time I didn't look at the events. I looked at the future, tomorrow, another event. Briefing 8:00 a.m. status, attended. I felt something tighten. Because that wasn't a prediction, it wasn't tentative, it was certain, confirmed. I tapped into it. The details opened, location. Time, same structure, same tone, and at the bottom, the same line. Initial confirmation received. I leaned back slowly, because now this wasn't about past entries or current ones, it was about something else. Something that had already decided where I would be, what I would do, and that I would complete it. I looked at the time again. 6:18 p.m., then back at the event for tonight. 7:30 p.m. Already marked as attended, already logged, already finished. I stood up slowly, walked to the hallway, and looked at my coat, still hanging where I left it, my shoes by the door. Everything exactly as it should be. I hadn't left. Not today, not yesterday, not for any of these events. And yet, something had recorded that I had. I turned back toward the living room. Toward the phone, because now there was only one way to know. I picked it up again, opened the event for 7:30 p.m., and waited. Because if it was already marked as attended, then something had to happen. Not later, not eventually, soon. And as I stood there watching the screen, the time changed. 6:19 p.m., then 6:20. And for a moment, nothing happened. Then the activity log updated. A new line appeared, right below the previous one. Arrival registered 7:28 p.m. I didn't move. Because now it wasn't just recording the outcome, it was filling in the process, step by step, before it happened. And that meant one thing: this wasn't a record, it was a sequence, already written. Already unfolding. With or without me, I didn't refresh the screen, I didn't touch anything. I just stood there, watching, because now I understood something important. This wasn't triggered by me. It wasn't waiting for input, it was progressing. On its own, the activity log remained open. Entry confirmed 7:31 p.m. Arrival registered 7:28 p.m. Times that hadn't happened. Events that hadn't occurred, and yet they were already placed. I looked at the clock on the wall. 6:21 p.m., then back at the phone, because if this was real, then something else would appear. Another step, another detail, another confirmation. I waited 10 seconds, then the log updated again. Transit initiated 7:12 p.m. I felt my breath slow, because now it was going backward. Filling the sequence in reverse, from completion to arrival to movement. I looked at my shoes again, still by the door, untouched, clean. I hadn't left, not at 7:12, not at any time. And yet something had recorded that I had. I walked slowly to the door, stopped in front of it, looked at the handle, still, then back at the phone, because now there was no doubt left. This wasn't predicting, it was constructing. A full timeline, a complete sequence, as if I had already lived it. I opened the door slightly, just enough to see the hallway. Empty, quiet. Nothing unusual. I closed it again, locked it, then turned back toward the living room, because the question wasn't outside. It was inside the phone, inside the log. Inside whatever was generating this. I sat down, placed the phone on the table, and waited again. The log didn't change immediately, but I knew it would, because it had to. If the sequence was complete, then every step would appear, every moment accounted for. The phone vibrated softly. Not a call, not a message, just a shift. I picked it up. The log had updated again. Preparation phase 6:48 p.m. I stared at it. 6:48, that was in less than 30 minutes. I looked at the time again. 6:23 p.m., then back at the log. Because now the sequence was approaching the present. Step by step, filling in everything that would lead to the event. I leaned forward slightly, reading each line more carefully. Because something about them felt off, not just the timing, the wording. Preparation phase, transit initiated, arrival registered, entry confirmed. That wasn't how normal events are logged. That was structured, systematic, like something tracking a process. Not a person. I scrolled further down, looking for more, and then I saw it. A section I hadn't noticed before. Role status. I tapped it. The screen paused, then opened. Minimal, just one line. Assigned participant. Participant. I felt something settle, because that word didn't describe what I had done. It described what I was expected to do. I looked back at the activity log. Then at the event. Then at the time. 6:25 p.m., then back at the log. Preparation phase 6:48 p.m. That was still in the future, which meant something would happen between now and then. Something that would move me, not physically, structurally, into that role. I stood up again, walked to the kitchen, picked up a glass, filled it with water, not because I needed it. Because I needed to do something normal, something that wasn't part of the sequence. I took a sip, then placed the glass down, looked at the phone again, still on the table, still active. Still progressing, I walked back to it, picked it up. And this time I tried something different. I created a new event. Simple. Stay home 7:30 p.m. I saved it. The calendar updated. The new event appeared, clear, defined. I waited. 5 seconds. 10. Nothing happened. Then the event changed, not gradually, immediately. Stay home 7:30 p.m. status canceled. I froze. Because I hadn't canceled it, I tapped it. The details opened. At the bottom, a line. Conflict with existing sequence. I felt something tighten in my chest, because that wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't optional, it was enforced. I looked back at the main event. Meeting confirmed 7:30 p.m. status attended. Still there, unchanged, unchallenged, I leaned back slowly. Because now the system wasn't just recording, it was rejecting alternatives. Anything that didn't align was removed. I looked at the time again. 6:27 p.m., then back at the log. Preparation phase 6:48 p.m. I sat there, still, thinking because now the structure was clear. A sequence had been defined, a role had been assigned, and any deviation was corrected. I picked up the phone again, scrolled back to the first event, 10 days ago. Introductory meeting 9:00 a.m. status attended. Then the note. Initial confirmation received. I stared at it. Because that was the beginning, the moment something had started, something I hadn't noticed, something I hadn't questioned. I tapped into its log. The screen opened, and at the top, a single line. User acknowledged entry. Acknowledged, not attended, not completed, acknowledged. I felt something settle into place, because that was the difference. Everything had started the moment I confirmed something, without realizing it. I leaned back slowly. Because now the question wasn't what would happen at 7:30, it was something else. What had I already confirmed 10 days ago? I tried to remember, not the whole day, just that moment. 10 days ago, 9:00 a.m. Introductory meeting status attended. I closed my eyes briefly. Letting the memory settle, because it wasn't something dramatic. There had been no alarm, no interruption, just a notification, a simple one. The kind you accept without thinking. I opened my eyes again, picked up the phone, and searched back through my notifications, scrolling carefully until I found it. 10 days ago, a reminder. Introductory meeting, confirm attendance. I tapped it. The details opened. Minimal, no location, no context, just a button. Confirm. I stared at it because I remembered this, not clearly. But enough, I had seen it while doing something else. Probably standing in the kitchen or walking through the hallway, and I had pressed it without thinking, because that's what you do. You confirm, you clear it, you move on. I exhaled slowly, because that was the moment, not the meeting, not the event, the confirmation. That's when it started. I went back to the current event. 7:30 p.m., still marked as attended, still progressing, still building its own timeline. I looked at the activity log again. Preparation phase 6:48 p.m. It hadn't changed yet, but it would. Because the sequence was moving toward the present, I stood up again, walked to the hallway, stopped in front of the door, looked at my coat. My shoes, still untouched. Still exactly where they had been. I hadn't prepared anything. I hadn't moved. And yet the system had already recorded that I would. I turned back toward the living room, picked up the phone. And this time I did something different. I spoke, not to anyone, not expecting a response, just out loud. I'm not going. The words felt simple, direct, clear. I waited, nothing happened. No notification, no change. The log remained the same because speaking wasn't enough. I understood that now. This system didn't respond to intention, it responded to action. I looked at the time again. 6:31 p.m., then back at the log. Preparation phase 6:48 p.m. 17 minutes. I walked to the table, sat down, and placed the phone in front of me. Because now I needed to see what would happen when the present reached the sequence. Not before, not after, at the exact moment. Time passed, slowly. 6:32, 6:33, 6:34, the room stayed quiet. No changes, no updates, until 6:35, the phone vibrated, I looked down, the log had updated. A new line appeared. Environmental readiness confirmed. I frowned slightly. Because that wasn't something I had done, I hadn't prepared anything, I hadn't changed anything, and yet it was marked as complete. I looked around the room, the lights, the table, the door. Everything normal, everything unchanged, and yet something had been registered. I leaned forward slightly, reading the log again. Environmental readiness. That wasn't about me. That was about the space, the conditions, something outside of direct action. I stood up, walked slowly around the room, looking for anything unusual, anything that had changed, but there was nothing. Until I stopped, near the window, and noticed something small. The light, it had shifted, not dramatically, just slightly, the angle, the tone, as if the room had adjusted itself to a specific state. I stepped back, because now the system wasn't just tracking me, it was tracking the environment, everything that could affect the sequence. I returned to the table, sat down again. Because now avoiding action wasn't enough. The system could still progress. Without me, through everything else. I looked at the time. 6:38 p.m., then back at the log. Preparation phase 6:48 p.m. 10 minutes. I leaned back slowly, because the pattern was clear now. The sequence would continue, whether I participated or not, step by step, condition by condition. Until it reached the final point. 7:30 p.m., the confirmed event, the attended meeting. I picked up the phone again, opened the role status. Assigned participant. I stared at it. Because that word wasn't optional. It wasn't descriptive, it was fixed. I tried to change it. Tapped, held, nothing happened. No options, no settings, no way to alter it. I went back to the event. Scrolled down, looking for anything else, and then I saw it, another section. Completion criteria. I tapped it. The screen paused, then opened. A list, short, precise. Presence confirmed. Transit validated. Entry completed. Participation acknowledged. I felt something settle inside me, because that was the structure, not just the timeline. The requirements, the steps needed to complete the sequence, and now I understood something else. The sequence didn't care how it happened, only that it did. I leaned back slowly. Because that meant, even if I didn't go, even if I didn't move, something else could satisfy those conditions. I looked at the time again. 6:41 p.m., then back at the log. Preparation phase 6:48 p.m., 7 minutes, and for the first time I wasn't just watching the sequence. I was waiting to see if it needed me at all. 6:42 p.m., the seconds felt more defined now. Not slower, just sharper, because each one brought the present closer to the sequence. I didn't move. I stayed seated, the phone in front of me, the room quiet, the door still closed. Because now I understood something important. This wasn't about rushing to stop it. It was about seeing how far it could go without me. I looked at the activity log again. Environmental readiness confirmed, still there, unchanged. Then I looked at the next line. Preparation phase 6:48 p.m., 6 minutes. I leaned forward slightly. Because this was the first moment that would overlap. The present would meet the recorded future. I watched the time. 6:43, 6:44, 6:45, nothing changed, no vibration, no update. The system remained still, waiting, like it had paused at the edge of something. 6:46, still nothing. I glanced toward the hallway again, the door, the coat, the shoes. Everything exactly where it had been. No movement, no indication that anything was preparing. 6:47, I exhaled slowly. Because now there was only 1 minute left, I looked back at the phone. At the log, at the line waiting to be fulfilled. Preparation phase 6:48 p.m. The seconds moved. 6:47:30, 6:47:40, 6:47:50, then 6:48 p.m. The phone vibrated. I didn't touch it, I just looked. The log updated. Preparation phase completed. I didn't move, because I hadn't done anything, not a single action, not a single step. And yet it had completed. I leaned back slowly. Because that confirmed it. The sequence didn't require my action. It only required conditions. And those conditions were being satisfied without me. I looked at the next line. Transit initiated 7:12 p.m. Still ahead, still waiting. I checked the time. 6:49 p.m. Then I stood up, because now the test had changed. It wasn't about not acting. It was about breaking the conditions. I walked to the window, closed the curtain, the room darkened. I turned off the light, then turned it back on, small changes, simple ones. I looked around. Because if the system tracked the environment, then altering it should disrupt something. I waited. 5 seconds, 10, nothing. I picked up the phone again, checked the log, no changes. No adjustments. Everything remained exactly as it had been. I frowned slightly. Because that meant the environment wasn't being measured in that way, not visually, not through simple changes. Something deeper, something more structured. I walked back to the table, sat down again, and this time I did something different. I opened the event for tomorrow. Briefing 8:00 a.m. status attended. I tapped into its log. The screen opened, and there it was, a full sequence, already completed. Preparation phase 7:18 a.m. Transit initiated 7:42 a.m. Arrival registered 7:58 a.m. Entry confirmed 8:01 a.m. Participation acknowledged 8:23 a.m. I stared at it. Because that hadn't happened yet. Not tomorrow, not in reality. And yet it was already done. Fully, completely, I leaned back slowly, because now this wasn't just about tonight. The sequence extended beyond. Days, events, actions, all defined, all recorded, all completed before I lived them. I looked at my hands, resting on the table, still, unmoving. Because now the question wasn't whether I could stop tonight's event. It was something else. If tomorrow was already completed, then what exactly was I doing now? I picked up the phone again. Opened the role status. Assigned participant, still there, still unchanged. I tapped it again. Nothing, no options, no settings, just a fixed assignment. I went back to the main screen. Looked at the event for tonight. 7:30 p.m., status, attended. I checked the time. 6:52 p.m., 38 minutes away, and yet already finished. I leaned forward slightly. Because something about this didn't add up. Not the timeline, not the sequence, something else. The system was precise, consistent, structured, but there was one thing it couldn't account for, me. Not my presence, my awareness, because now I wasn't following the sequence. I wasn't confirming it, I wasn't participating, and yet it continued, which meant one thing. My role wasn't what I thought it was. I looked at the completion criteria again. Presence confirmed, transit validated, entry completed, participation acknowledged. Each one could be satisfied without me, through conditions, through proxies, through something else. I exhaled slowly, because now the system didn't need me to act, it only needed me to exist, and that changed everything. I looked back at the time. 6:54 p.m., then at the next step. Transit initiated 7:12 p.m. 18 minutes. I sat there, still, because now there was only one thing left to test. If the system could complete everything without me, then what would happen if I removed myself entirely? I didn't stand up immediately. Because removing myself wasn't as simple as leaving the room. The system had already shown that. It didn't depend on my movement or my decisions. It depended on something else. Something more constant. I looked at the phone again, at the event, at the sequence, at the confirmation that everything would happen with or without me. Then I looked at my reflection in the darkened window. Faint, still, present, and that's when it became clear. It wasn't tracking what I did, it was tracking that I was there. Presence, not action. I leaned forward slowly, because now the test wasn't about movement, it was about existence. I picked up the phone again. Opened the completion criteria. Presence confirmed. That was the first step. The one everything else depended on. If presence wasn't confirmed, then the rest couldn't follow. Or at least it shouldn't. I stood up, walked to the hallway, stopped in front of the mirror, looked at myself, then looked at the phone again. Because now there was only one way to test it. I turned the phone off completely. The screen went black, the reflection faded, and for a moment there was nothing, no input, no tracking, no confirmation, just silence. I stepped back slightly. Because now the system had no visual, no interaction, no presence to observe, or at least that's what I expected. I waited. 5 seconds, 10, 15, nothing happened, no vibration, no sound. No change. I walked back into the living room, placed the phone on the table, still off, and sat down. Because now if the system required me, then this would stop it. Completely. Time passed. A minute, then 2, then 3, still nothing. I leaned back slightly. Because for the first time it felt like it had worked. The sequence had stopped. The progression had paused. The structure had been interrupted. Then the lights dimmed. Not fully, just slightly. As if something had adjusted, I sat still. Because that wasn't random, that was a response. Not through the phone, through the environment. I looked toward the hallway, then back at the table. The phone still off, unreachable, disconnected, and yet something had reacted. The lights returned to normal. Then the phone turned on by itself. The screen lit up, without input, without contact. I didn't move, I just watched. Because now the system wasn't waiting for me to reconnect. It was reconnecting itself. The screen unlocked. The calendar opened automatically. The event for 7:30 p.m. filled the display. And the log updated. A new line appeared. Presence confirmed, alternate method. I felt something settle inside me, because that was the answer. It didn't need me to confirm. It only needed something that represented me. My device, my environment, my existence. I stepped back slightly, because now turning off the phone hadn't removed me. It had only changed the way I was observed. The log continued. Another update. Transit initiated 7:12 p.m. I checked the time. 6:58 p.m. It had moved forward without me, without confirmation. Without interaction, I exhaled slowly. Because now there was no doubt left. The sequence would complete. No matter what I did, no matter what I avoided, no matter what I interrupted, it would adapt. Adjust, continue. I picked up the phone again, the screen still active, the event still progressing, and for the first time I didn't try to stop it, because stopping it wasn't the solution. Understanding it was, I sat down slowly, placed the phone in front of me, and watched, because now the sequence wasn't something I could break. It was something I had to see all the way to the end. 7:00 p.m. The room felt smaller now, not physically, structurally, as if everything inside it had been accounted for, defined, placed. I sat still, the phone in front of me, the screen already awake, the calendar open, the sequence moving forward without interruption. Transit initiated 7:12 p.m. Still ahead, still inevitable. I didn't try to stop it anymore, because now I knew it wouldn't matter. The system didn't require permission. It required alignment, and it had already found a way to align without me. I leaned forward slightly, watching the screen, not the event, the log, because that's where the truth was, that's where the process revealed itself. Time passed. 7:01, 7:02, no changes. The system didn't update constantly, only at key points, defined steps. I looked around the room again, the same objects, the same layout, but now they felt integrated, like part of something larger. Something I couldn't fully see. I stood up slowly, walked to the hallway, stopped in front of the door, looked at it, because that was the threshold, the point of transition. Transit initiated 7:12 p.m. That would be the moment, when the sequence moved from here to somewhere else. I turned back toward the living room, picked up the phone, held it for a moment. Then looked at the screen again. Still the same, still progressing. Then 7:03 p.m. The phone vibrated. I didn't touch it, I just watched. A new line appeared. Movement pattern established. I frowned slightly, because I hadn't moved, not in any meaningful way, and yet something had been detected. I looked down at my hands, then at my feet. Then back at the screen. Movement pattern, that didn't mean action, that meant behavior, repetition, consistency, the way I existed in the space. I stepped slightly to the side, then back. Small movement, deliberate, the phone vibrated again. Another update, pattern variance within acceptable range. I exhaled slowly, because now even deviation was accounted for. The system wasn't just tracking movement, it was measuring it, comparing it, allowing for variation. As long as it stayed within limits, I stood still again. Because now I understood something critical. This wasn't a rigid sequence, it was flexible, adaptive, designed to tolerate difference as long as the outcome remained the same. I walked back to the table, sat down, and looked at the phone again. 7:05 p.m. Then the screen flickered, not off, not on, just shifted for a brief second. And in that moment, I saw something else. Not the calendar, not the log, something underneath, a different layer, a different interface. It disappeared immediately, replaced by the normal screen. But I had seen it, enough to recognize it. A grid, structured, connected, not events. Nodes. I leaned forward slightly, because that wasn't part of the calendar, that was something deeper. Something behind it. I waited, hoping it would appear again, but it didn't. The screen remained normal, stable, controlled. I sat back slowly. Because now the system wasn't just recording a timeline, it was part of something larger, a network, and I was one point inside it. I looked at the time again. 7:07 p.m., then back at the log. Transit initiated 7:12 p.m. 5 minutes. I stood up again, walked to the door, placed my hand on the handle, not opening it, just holding it, because now I needed to feel the boundary. The point where the sequence would shift. The handle was cool, still, unchanged, and yet it felt different, like it wasn't just a door anymore, like it was part of the system, a node. A transition point. I let go, stepped back, then returned to the table, because now there was nothing left to test, nothing left to interrupt, only one thing remained. To see what would happen when the sequence reached the present. 7:08 p.m., then 7:09, then 7:10. The phone vibrated, a new line appeared. Pre-transit alignment confirmed. I didn't move. Because now everything was in place, everything had been satisfied without me. I looked at the door again, then back at the phone, then at the time. 7:11 p.m., 1 minute. And for the first time, I felt something shift, not fear, something closer to realization. Because whatever happened at 7:12 wouldn't be something I did. It would be something that happened to me. 7:12 p.m. The second it changed, everything aligned, not gradually, not subtly, instantly. The phone vibrated once. The log updated. Transit initiated 7:12 p.m. I didn't move because I hadn't initiated anything, and yet it had begun. I looked at the door, still closed, still locked, exactly as it had been. Then the handle moved, not slowly, not carefully. It turned, clean, precise, as if it had been triggered, not by force, by sequence. I stepped back immediately. Because this time it wasn't a possibility. It was happening. The lock clicked, released, without my hand touching it. The door opened, just enough. A narrow gap, darkness beyond it, the hallway. Silent, still, but now accessible, I stood there, watching, because this wasn't a knock. This wasn't a request. This was execution. The phone vibrated again. I looked down. Another line appeared. Threshold reached. I lifted my eyes back to the door, because now the system had completed the transition. Without me, I stepped closer, not out of curiosity, out of necessity. Because now the sequence had moved, and I needed to understand where. I stopped just in front of the open door, looked into the hallway, empty, nothing there, and yet everything had changed. Because the door wasn't just open, it had been opened. I didn't touch it, I didn't push it further, I just stood there. Then the phone vibrated again, another update. Presence relocation pending. I felt something settle, because that was the next step, not transit, relocation, movement from one point to another, and it hadn't happened yet. which meant something was waiting. I looked down at the phone again, then back at the hallway. Because now the sequence required one thing, my position to change. I stepped back. Away from the door, because that was the only action I had control over. I wasn't going to step through it. I wasn't going to follow the sequence. I stood still, inside the apartment, waiting. The phone remained silent for a few seconds. Then a new line appeared. Presence relocation, alternative path engaged. I froze, because that wasn't expected. That meant the system didn't require the door. It had another way. I turned immediately, scanning the room, looking for anything, any shift, any movement. And then I saw it. The window not open. Not broken, but different. The reflection, it didn't match. I stepped closer, slowly, because something about it felt wrong. The room behind me was still, but the reflection wasn't. There was movement, not from me, from the other side. I stopped, because now I understood. The system didn't need physical movement. It needed positional change. And it could create that without me moving. The phone vibrated again. Presence relocation in progress. I didn't turn away from the window, because I couldn't. Because what I was seeing wasn't just a reflection anymore. It was a version, a space. Similar, but not identical. And inside it there was someone, standing where I should be, looking back at me. Still unmoving, exact. And then the figure raised its hand, mirroring me, perfectly. Except I hadn't moved. The phone vibrated again. Relocation complete. I stepped back instantly. Because that was the moment, the shift, the change. I turned away from the window, looked back at the room, everything the same, the table, the chair, the phone, but something felt off, subtle. Not visible, but present. I looked down at my hands, then back at the phone, then back at the window. Because now there was only one question left. Which side was I on? I didn't go back to the window immediately, because whatever had just happened couldn't be undone by looking at it again. I stood in the middle of the room, still, trying to feel something. Anything that had changed, not visually, not structurally, something else, but everything felt the same. The table was where it had always been, the chair, the light, the air itself. Nothing had moved, and yet something had. I looked down at my hands again, turned them slightly, flexed my fingers, normal, responsive, mine. I reached for the phone, picked it up. The screen was still on, the calendar still open, the log finalized. Presence relocation completed. No pending steps, no next actions, no continuation, just complete. I scrolled through it once more, every line in place, every phase accounted for, from preparation to transit to relocation, all executed, all confirmed. I looked at the time. 7:13 p.m. 1 minute after the transition, 1 minute after everything aligned, I exhaled slowly, because now there was no more sequence, no more structure, no more system guiding what came next, just this. Whatever this was, I turned back toward the window, slowly, because I needed to see it again. To confirm something, not the reflection myself, I stepped closer, looked carefully. The reflection matched, perfectly, every movement, every position, exactly as it should be, no delay, no difference, just me. I leaned slightly to the side, it followed. Perfect. I raised my hand. It mirrored, exact. I held my breath for a moment, then let it go, because whatever had been there before wasn't there anymore, or at least it wasn't visible. I stepped back. Because that was enough, I didn't need to test it further. I turned away from the window, walked back to the table, and sat down, the phone still in my hand, the log still visible, complete. I locked the screen, placed it down, and leaned back, because now there was nothing left to respond to. No prompts, no confirmations, no corrections, just silence, real silence. The kind that doesn't expect anything from you. I closed my eyes for a moment, not to think, not to analyze, just to feel the absence of everything that had been there before. Then I opened them again. Slowly, looked around the room, everything exactly as it had always been, and yet not quite, because now I couldn't be certain of one thing, not anymore. I reached for the phone again, unlocked it, opened the calendar, scrolled to tomorrow. Briefing 8:00 a.m. status attended, still there, still complete, unchanged. I stared at it. Because that shouldn't have been affected, not by what had just happened, not by the relocation, and yet it remained, as if the sequence hadn't ended, only advanced. I went back to today. 7:30 p.m. Meeting confirmed status attended. Finalized, closed, complete. I leaned forward slightly, because something about that didn't sit right, not the event, the perspective. I looked at the time again. 7:15 p.m., then back at the event. Because if I had already attended it, then where had I been? I checked the activity log again. Every step accounted for. Every phase completed. But none of it had happened here, not in this space, not in this version of the room. I slowly turned my head, looking around again, at the same objects, the same layout. The same quiet. And for the first time, I considered something I hadn't allowed myself to think before. What if the sequence hadn't moved me? What if it had moved everything else? I stood up slowly. Walked to the hallway, stopped in front of the door, opened it. The hallway was still there, still the same, but something felt different, subtle, indescribable. I stepped out, just one step. Looked around, everything familiar, everything unchanged, and yet not quite. I stepped back inside, closed the door, locked it, then leaned against it. Because now there was no system telling me what to do, no sequence guiding me, no structure defining my actions, just uncertainty, and one final question, not about the events, not about the system, about myself. I looked at my hands one last time, then at the room, then at the phone, and quietly, without thinking, I asked it. Did I move or did everything else? The phone didn't vibrate, no message appeared, no response came, just silence. But this time it wasn't empty, it felt final.